Good afternoon, everyone. I am delighted to welcome you to our migration series, and want to say a special thank you for everyone for joining us on a late afternoon on this Wednesday in November. This has been a real treat for us this entire semester, having a weekly opportunity for us to share with you and partner with our campus at our partners and friends at UW-Madison. Let me briefly just introduce myself and the series and our panelists and give everyone a little bit of an orientation to our conversation this afternoon. My name is Natasha Boschis Sugiyama. I'm the director of the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies at UWM. And I have the opportunity to introduce the panelists and to all. The series began as a collaboration in part because we had a plan to host everyone in Milwaukee in the spring to have a conversation about the various dimensions of migration in the Americas. Our friends at Madison had a similar conference planned, and we combined and joined our efforts to offer this webinar. And one of the nice things about the silver linings, I would say, that we've discovered in this process is that we've been able to bring in many, many people who are from further afield. And so while our conversation today is about Milwaukee and how migration has impacted our local communities here, we've been able to have a broader conversation with many of you, and so we're delighted to have everybody here today. Before we start, I want to thank and acknowledge the Department of Education and our Title VI grant. Both UWM and Madison are part of the UW Consortium as National Resource Centers for Latin America, and to offer this program as part of our America. We also want to thank our various faculty contributors who have been involved along. I'd like to acknowledge the work that Catalin, Alberto Vargas, and M at Madison have put together, as well as our staff member, Julie Klein, here in Milwaukee, as well as CLACS fellows. So with that, if I may turn now to my role as moderator, I guess offer a little bit of a background for this panel. And one of the things that we really were excited to do was to really link the conversations that we've been having all year and all throughout the series about how migration has taken place and the linkages to Milwaukee. People in Milwaukee who have migrated are living their lives, are affected by migration patterns, are affected by the politics that we've been talking about all semester. And I wanted to have an opportunity to hear from various voices. And so I'm very pleased to introduce our three panelists because each of them has engaged with these questions about the lived experiences of migration in our local communities in different ways. So what I'd like to do is to briefly introduce each of our panelists. And as a bit of housekeeping, what I will suggest is that all three of them will speak for about 15 minutes or so. And then questions can be directed to the chat, and we'll probably take those questions after the three presenters have spoken and shared their insights with us. So that's the general housekeeping portion. All three of our presenters have Milwaukee and UWM ties. And first I'd like to introduce Associate Professor Rachel Bloom-Pojar, who is in the Department of English. She works at the intersection of rhetoric and health promotion, working in areas of community literacies, feminist ethnographies, language access, and reproductive justice. She's been working on projects that involve Promotores de Salud, health promoters who work with reproductive and sexual health education here in our local community. And so I'm delighted to include her. She has authored many articles, and I encourage you, if you are interested in her scholarship, to please look at her website. There are a very long list of impressive accomplishments. Our two other presenters I'm delighted to introduce because they are also UWM alums. And so it's nice to be able to share their accomplishments with the group as well. Jesus Salas is a graduate of UWM and has an advanced degree from University of Wisconsin-Madison. He's also a former UW system regent, so for that we thank you for your service. Jesus is a descendant of Mexican-American family who came to Wisconsin in the 1940s, and he worked throughout his early school years as a migrant farm worker. Salas led protests, marches, and organizing efforts to secure rights and improve conditions for himself, his family, his migrant community friends, and beyond throughout the 60s and the 70s. We are very pleased to have him join us and share his insights and the work that he has been doing with the Wisconsin Academy of Science, Arts, and Letters. And then finally, allow me to introduce my former student, Margarita. Margarita is, Garcia Rojas is now a PhD student in history at UW Urbana-Champaign. She did amazing work while she was here on our campus, and she graduated with more, I think she wins the prize for the number of majors and certificates. She's a LaCusel major, having majored in Latin American, Caribbean, and Latinx studies at UWM. She also majored in history and Spanish and has a cultures and community certificate, a comparative ethnic studies certificate, and Latino studies certificate. But she did terrific projects with another CLACS faculty fellow, Professor Rachel Buff, documenting the oral histories of migrant youth here in Milwaukee, and she'll share her personal experience having experienced migration to the US at age 3. So with that, I will turn it to Rachel and ask her to share what she's been working on and the insights she's gained here with the Promotores de Salud.
Thank you so much, Natasha, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm going to share my screen in just a moment. And are we seeing it? I see.
Perfect.
Please let me know if there's any issues with that.
Okay.
Okay, great. So I'm so happy to be here with you all today. Because of our limited time together, I'm just going to be sharing a little bit of a larger project that I'm working on right now, very much a work in progress. I welcome ideas and questions that you might have. I'm actually really grateful for the opportunity this year. I'm sort of working outside of UWM. I have a fellowship that's allowing me to be working with Planned Parenthood of Wisconsin and their Latinx programs and initiatives department, specifically with the health promoters who work across Wisconsin, but there's a large concentration of them in Milwaukee, hence why I fit on this panel. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the ways I'm thinking about rhetorics of reproductive justice and also the work that the Promotores de Salud are doing kind of at these interesting intersections of issues that come up as far as like organizations that they work with and the needs of the communities that they work with. So I start by sharing with you the sort of definition for Planned Parenthood's Promotores program, and it's modeled on Mexican and Central American adult peer education programs, which bring bilingual reproductive health education and information into Latinx homes and community gathering locations. Promotores bring sexual and reproductive health information and resources into communities that need them, building trusted relationships and decreasing barriers to healthcare access. I would mention that a lot of people in attendance here are familiar with Promotores de Salud in general, that this is a role and a concept that's very familiar across Latin America, definitely having its roots in Central America. and being a really successful way of connecting with communities, especially when institutions don't have the relationships or priorities that would initially connect them with communities as much as they'd like to. This is where I also have my disclaimer that what I'm doing is not necessarily representing the views of Planned Parenthood Federation of America. And so there's that. But I'm really interested in the ways that I've heard about how these programs, it's at a number of affiliates across the United States, actually began because a number of CEOs at Planned Parenthood had gone down to Central America and seen the success of the work of Promotores in Central America and wanted to bring that back to better serve different immigrant and Latinx communities in their various states where they were. In that movement, that traveling and coming back, the movement of the role in which Promotores de Salud have really emerged and become a very popular way of approaching community health and public health across the United States. I'm interested in also thinking about the ways that the promotores that I work with, all immigrants themselves from a variety of countries, bring their lived experiences and their expertise of understanding the challenges that their various communities face and how that informs the work that they do and the expertise that they have. And so another concept that I am working with is reproductive justice. And that is defined by Sister Song Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective as the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, have children, not have children, and parent the children we have in safe and sustainable communities. I wanted to share a little bit about her story of reproductive justice so that we understand a little bit of why there's kind of a complex history of this in the work that I'm doing. So from their website, they say, Indigenous women, women of color, and trans people have always fought for reproductive justice, but the term was invented in 1994, right before attending the International Conference on Population and Development in Cairo, where the entire world agreed that the individual right to plan your own family must be central to global development. A group of Black women gathered in Chicago in June of 1994. They recognized that the women's rights movement, led by and representing middle-class and wealthy white women, could not defend the needs of women of color and other marginalized women and trans people. We needed to lead our own national movement to uplift the needs of the most marginalized women, families, and communities. And really at the heart of the reproductive justice movement is leadership by and the centering of perspectives of Black women, Latinx women, and other women in communities of color in the ways that it's really leading us to think more broadly from reproductive health and reproductive rights as focusing on choice, to include choice in the ways that people decide whether they want to parent or not parent, but to also recognize the complex and really traumatic histories that a lot of groups have had in relation to forced sterilization, separation of families, and a variety of other things that aren't always accounted for with traditionally white feminist-led movements talking about reproductive rights and choice. And so the relationship between Planned Parenthood and reproductive justice is complicated. If you're familiar with Planned Parenthood in general, you might picture a lot of white women wearing pink shirts and hats and advocating for abortion access or birth control access, reproductive rights. There are different, and that certainly isn't all of what happens with Planned Parenthood and the people that consist of the coalitions that advocate for what they want to advocate for, but it certainly is at the forefront of what a lot of people think of with the institution and with the leadership at a lot of levels with Planned Parenthood, is that it is very white and it is not necessarily centering women of color and communities of color in the ways that a reproductive justice organization would. So what I'm learning through different interviews and conversations with people is that it is complicated, but it's something that a lot of people are trying to work through in different ways and different roles across different affiliates and places with Planned Parenthood across the United States. One thing that I am also looking into and interested in is the way that the Promotores de Salud program in Wisconsin does have some really interesting and important connections to reproductive justice, and they actually have it as a part of their curriculum with working with communities. It's very central to what they do. And so ultimately part of what I'm going to be doing is communicating both to the institution and to other people about the ways that the work that these promotores do advances that movement. So it was kind of interesting that at the same time in the 1990s that the reproductive justice movement was picking up and becoming something that had this name, that was also when the Health Promoters Program began with the Planned Parenthood of Wisconsin. It began as something that was translating material and presenting information in people's homes. It's something that's developed into having home health parties or fiestas caseras as a core part of what they do, and a community-driven curriculum that was based on like Avon parties as a model, in which the health promoters are consultants that kind of help facilitate conversations, share resources, and host parties while also getting compensated for their time and compensating people who host these parties. And so a lot of what they do moves across education and empowerment and advocacy work. So I have a long text on this in the next slide, and it's just to sort of reinforce what I'm sharing. I'm sharing an excerpt from a forthcoming article that I wrote with my collaborator, Maria Barker, who's the founder and the director of the program. And she talks about how it began. 17 years ago, I started working for the Community Education Department at PPWI. At that time, we were not reaching the Latinx population, especially not the Spanish-speaking Latinx communities. I translated the English modules that we were using into Spanish, and they focused on reproductive health, such as birth control methods, sexually transmitted infections, and breast and cervical cancer. With the translated modules, I tried to market these sessions to local high schools, but found there were too many gatekeepers telling me that parents did not want Planned Parenthood to talk to their children about sex. I decided to eliminate the gatekeepers and go directly to the parents. I knew many parents in the local community, as I had previously been working in our health centers for 19 years in various roles, and many moms accessed our healthcare services. I reached out to them and asked if they would be interested in having me come to their house and talk to their family about birth control methods, and they said yes. Our first gathering included a grandmother who was likely over 65 years old, two moms about 25 to 28 years old, a couple teenagers, and a few children. No one really talked except for me, but they invited me back. At the second session, I brought samples of birth control methods, and while showing the methods, they noticed a tampon in the kit. All of a sudden, the whole session shifted from me talking to the participants about birth control methods to the participants talking and asking all sorts of questions about tampons. Adults and youth alike were so inquisitive about something I considered so normal. This was the interaction I was looking for: participation, honesty, interest, and fun. We started calling the sessions home health parties because they were as fun as a party with food and laughter, while we were all learning from one another. This opened my eyes to the importance of not just sharing information that we as the agency want to give, but also providing the information our participants want, since they are the experts of their own lives. And this is really at the heart of the work that I've done with Maria and with the health promoters, is highlighting that expertise and the ways that health promoters and community members really are the experts of their own lives. And a core part of what the promotores do is confianza, which can be translated as trust or confidence. But confianza really goes a lot deeper than just trusting someone or having confidence in them. The Promotores de Salud are experts at creating confianza and connecting communities with resources. And so part of what I'm exploring and learning from them is, how are they experts at creating confianza? How do you do this and gain the trust of communities, especially when talking about some really difficult topics with reproductive and sexual health? And they just do a variety of different things that I think are much more complex than a lot of people think when they initially are like, well, they're from the community, and that's why they build trust with them. And so part of what I'm working through is actually like describing what else is going on with this. They describe a number of different ways about how people engage with confianza. So they enter into it, they create it, they establish it, sometimes they have it with others. And so I'm really thinking about just the complex actions that go into creating confianza with others. And the conversations that happen during and after fiestas caseras indicate that the promotores cultivate a space of deep trust and respect. They shared with me a lot of people open up to them about some really difficult things, about sexual trauma, about abuse, and just the fact that they trust them to open up about these things and ask for resources, I think speaks a lot to the work that they're doing. And so just because I don't want to go over time, I'm going to end on a few other things that I want to share about the work that the Promotores do and that I'm thinking through in relation to reproductive justice. So in addition to reproductive and sexual health education, they also empower individuals to know their rights and advocate for themselves. So whether it's encouraging an individual to advocate for their need for an interpreter when a health provider might be just trying to get by with the Spanish that they have, if it's trying to stop an interaction because they notice that maybe not everything's being communicated or that they need extra assistance, empowering individuals to know that they have rights, including if they are undocumented in their community, identifying as undocumented immigrants, to know that they still have rights and should be able to advocate for those for themselves, or the health promoters will sometimes actually accompany people to help advocate for their needs as well. So they advocate for their community's needs, not just on a one-to-one basis, but also through civic participation. They're very active with Voces de la Frontera and participating in their May Day marches and other advocacy. They were very active with nonpartisan work in registering people to vote this election. And it's been very interesting to see the stats about the ways that Latinx voter turnout really went up a huge amount this election. And I got to see kind of behind the scenes of the ways that the health promoters, a number of them who can't vote themselves, worked very hard making calls to people to talk about just the importance of getting your voice heard, no matter who you voted for, to encourage people or to encourage their family members to vote. And they said a lot of the people they talked to could not vote themselves either, but they were excited to engage in conversations about wanting change and their children or their nephews or nieces who would be voting for the first time, and they hoped would be voting for them in a way. And they also lift up the experiences and needs of undocumented Spanish-speaking immigrants and their families. So in every week or every month, when they report back on the conversations they have and the different things they talk about with community members, they bring up these issues to Maria, their director, who then kind of advocates for that within their institution and helps look for grants that can help support the work that they're already doing and help respond to needs and concerns of the community. So ultimately, while they're consultants, they work on a consultant basis with Planned Parenthood of Wisconsin, which is a part of a larger network of an institution that may have its own complicated history with reproductive justice. When I think about the quote from the Sister Song description of reproductive justice as, "We needed to lead our own national movement to uplift the needs of the most marginalized women, families, and communities," I think that everything that the Promotores are doing is definitely a part of this movement, and something that I think that Planned Parenthood of Wisconsin, that healthcare policymakers, administrators, and other stakeholders can learn from, and really not think so much of the Promotores as people who can just bring information out into the community, but who can also bring information and change to institutions and to sort of the power players that make decisions that impact their communities. So that is what I have to share with you today. And I also just share some additional resources. I'm happy to follow up and share this with anyone who might want me to email them to them. So I'll stop sharing my screen. And thank you for your time.
Thank you. That was very interesting. I'm sure you'll generate lots of questions. I'll turn next to Mr. Jesus Salas, please.
I'm going to, first of all, as was noted, I'm a third-generation migrant worker, so I'm going to say something about the early migrations of my grandfather, my grandparents, who settled in the between the Nueces River and the Rio Grande River in 1906, coming from the state of Coahuila. And during that period of time, most of the migrants that were coming from into the United States were coming from the borderlands. And that's why I'm going to be referring to these migrants as Texas borderland migrants. And as you can see here, Coahuila, the state of Coahuila, Mexico now was at one time part of Texas. So my grandfather was crossing as a youth in the 1890s and finally decided to settle in South Central Texas in 1906. And the big reason that he settled, and I've identified these 4 counties, which were later known as a winter garden area. They're the Frio, Dimit, Zavala, and La Salle. In a community by the name of Crystal City. And if we were to identify all the communities in here, they all refer to the finding of artesian water. And that's the reason why my grandfather, my grandmother came, because water had been found, artesian water had been found. They no longer had to depend on the floods and the spring rains. And land speculators are in huge amounts of land, 10,000 acres and more, were opening up this land. Here I have a census and I want you to particularly focus between the 1900s and 1930s, or that is when my father comes in 1906. You notice in Zavala County, there were only 792 counted individuals. And these are huge tracts of land, by the way. Zavala County, our county in our home area, is over 750,000 acres. And the other counties are almost the same size. But look at that migration. First of all, that begins with the recruitment of these land speculators into northern Mexico, and later the chaos of the Mexican Revolution that begins in 1910, and the fleeing of Mexican residents from the northern counties into the United States. And you notice in Zavala County, 792 population, it increases to over 10,000, and the increases in the 4 other counties are likewise. So that you have a total increase in the population during this period of time from 8,000 to nearly 40,000 people. And of course, these are recorded population increases. Increases are much greater than that. Well, what really occurs is after one generation, as everyone knows, the Great Depression dislocates the Mexican settlements, and we have here in this picture these bad hombres, right, as the president would call them. It's a repatriation time, where the Mexican families that have come over to work in the last 30 years are now are the scapegoats. And hundreds of thousands of them are chased back into Mexico. And we see this family. By the way, this is a picture from immigration that I found in the internet. This is a picture of braceros, or that is part of our schizophrenic immigration policies during this period of time. Whereas in the one hand, we scapegoat the Mexican Americans that have been living here for a generation, and because of our involvement in the Second World War, now there's great labor shortages all over the country. So we make a treaty with the Mexican nation and start importing Mexican laborers. If you'll note in my notes at the bottom, during the war, actually around 40 or 50,000 braceros, primarily male laborers, are brought into the United States. But after the economy, after the World War II, hundreds of thousands of them are brought in yearly. You have over 400,000 of them coming in the mid 60s, basically competing with Mexican American farm laborers, squashing any attempt of Mexican American farm workers attempt to organize. This is one of the conditions, you know, as Carrie McWilliams, the author of the 1940s, used to talk about our migration as being a push and a pull, or that is a pull by the recruitment of these speculators, and the push, or that is fleeing apartheid. This is an internment camp in our community. There were approximately 10 internment camps throughout the United States, housing over 100,000 Japanese. This was a unique camp in the sense that it was for families. And secondly, it was going to be used as bartering for these families, these Japanese and some German families with Axis prisoners that they had, American and British prisoners. It never really worked out that way. But what to do with the prisoner of war camp after the Second World War in our community? Segregated Mexican schools. This is my elementary school and my brothers and a whole generation for the first 5 years. The towers that you can see in the barbed wire was gone, but it felt very much like a prisoner of war camp. The other slide that I have in regards to apartheid, that is the segregation of our community, is the poll taxes, white primaries, etc. We were prevented from participating in the political process. You see my grandfather's poll taxes back in 1915, 1919. 4 years later, there's poll taxes in the community. The way of creating Mexican Americans in our community prevented them there. None of them had ever been elected to a political position as a result of this Jim Crow laws. And this is one of the reasons why our family started migrating first out of here. My parents, as was noted, started coming to Wisconsin. You can see this image of the major seasonal farm worker streams. The ones that we belong to was the Midwestern migrant stream, as I identified my talk. And you can see that the region, as I identified as the Winter Garden region, moving directly into Wisconsin. We would stop and harvest asparagus in Illinois, hoeing and thinning beets, and Wisconsin and Hartford. Cucumber harvest later on in the Central Sense area. Then tomato harvest in the lower Michigan, Lake Michigan area. The frost would then chase us into the early cotton harvest in the upper Mississippi Delta, and then the late cotton harvest in the panhandle of Texas. This is these are images of the migrant labor camps. There were over 100,000 migrants coming into the Great Lakes region during this period of time, 15,000 of them to central Wisconsin. That image of the migrant labor camp on the top actually was in downtown Wautoma, Wisconsin. Very tidy, very small. The families, the workforce was primarily family-based. So this became very crowded. You can see on the far right where the common bathroom. The further away the migrants were, the migrant labor camps were from the communities, the worst condition they were. This is a migrant labor camp that we lived in. I lived in these facilities, our family did, for 2 years. Don't tell anybody if anybody's listening, but Wisconsin grows great cannabis. These are the Second War, when Japan takes over the Philippines, we can't produce rope. So the Department of Defense identifies Wisconsin as a great area to grow hemp and have rope for the Navy, for the United States Navy during the war. What to do with the hemp plants after the Second World War? Migrant labor camps. So hundreds of families would live in this hemp plants in Hartford, Wisconsin. Well, we resettled in Wisconsin in the 1959. I started working in the first child care programs in Wisconsin. In 1962, it grew to, in 3 years, to seven child care programs. And most of the teachers that were being hired by Wisconsin didn't know how to speak Spanish. So I would go down to Texas and recruit teachers and teacher aides. So here I am in Crystal City. What's going on in Crystal City? Well, if you read John Chalkley, text, a Chicano revolt in a South Texas town, there's a political revolt in our community. The Mexican-American community gets organized, pays their poll taxes, and chases the Anglo-Americans who have dominated the political scene for the last 50 years. So here I am organizing farm workers, but getting involved in the political activities that are going on in my old hometown. I really got inspired to start organizing farm workers when I read about Chavez and Huerta organizing in 65 and 66 and marching to Sacramento from Delano. And basically, I called them up. I didn't know him from Adam, and I said, hey, I want to do what you're doing. We're having a lot of difficulties here. I had gone back to the labor camps. Migrants are complaining about their conditions. And so we did what he did. We organized a 80-mile march from Watoma to Madison, protesting wages and working conditions and the migrant housing that I had spoken about earlier, workmen's compensation laws, etc. Now, that fall, we went out on the first migrant strike. If you're interested in that period, Valdez from the University of Minnesota identifies it as the first migrant worker strike in the Great Lakes region. The following year, in 1967, we take on the multinationals, or that is Libby, McNull, and Libby. We had made some mistakes during the march and the strike, and we didn't have any resources. Once we went out on strike, we didn't know how to feed the workers, where to house them. People got fired. We didn't know how to put them up. So we started doing walkouts. And we'd walk out so that the grower would know, Libby would know that we represent the majority of the workers, but we would come back to work later on in the day or the following day. So this is the Libby walkout in the summer of 1967. The Wisconsin, unlike the rest of the United States, including California, does cover migrant workers. So we petitioned the Wisconsin Employment Relations Commission. They ordered an election, and we won the election 405 to 8. Those 8 we were sure were an error. Libby's refused to negotiate with us, so we started organizing canning companies in 1968. And here we have a walkout in one of their canning companies in Hartford, Wisconsin. Again, this is not to get the workers fired. We would do it during the noon hour, come back, get the workers back to work after their lunch hour. After this is now the 3rd year of organizing, and Chavez says, Jesus, you're never gonna beat Libby's. We're having the same situation in California. Why don't you help me full time with a great boycott? And once we win the great boycott, I'll help you with Libby's. So here I go, moving to Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Wisconsin for the first time. But if you notice the title of my discussion is social unionism. We had never in Texas belonged. All the organizations under apartheid had been illegal. The only organization that the segregationists allowed us was a burial society, a funeral society, a mutual aid society. So our union was based on the benevolent foundations of a mutual aid society. So for the members of the union, we opened up an office, published a newspaper, provided legal services, opened up a health clinic, opened up a gasoline co-op. And as part of our effort, this transnational movement that we had in supporting Chavez, organized great boycotts throughout the central Wisconsin. Here is an image of the families. As you know, it was family based. You can see it was mostly children working in the fields, women and children. And here you have Eva Valenzuela, whose family was fired in 1968 for wearing a union button while she was harvesting cucumbers. One of the extraordinary things that happens is that since the workforce is family-based, women get involved in the leadership of the development of the labor camps, of the unions, of the locals that we had. And here you have women like Eva Valenzuela standing up for the right and exhorting other farm workers and women and young adults to join the union. This would happen. The same thing happens in the Great Boycott when we came to Milwaukee. Here we are in front of Kroger's food store when we move into Milwaukee. When we move in the summer of 1968, the NAACP Youth Council has been marching for 200 days. for an open housing ordinance. So there's an intersection with the farm workers movement and the civil rights movement, the African-American civil rights movement. And here Grappi is joining the picket line at Cole's Food Store on Capitol Avenue. And we adopted their direct action strategies. Grappi would say, Jesus, what are you doing there? Year after year, standing in front of the grocery stores, exhorting people not to buy grapes. You got to do a little bit of direct action. Well, what do you mean by that, Father Grappi? Well, if the grocer doesn't want to remove the grapes, you just get increase attention a little bit. Well, to make a long story short, we had been marching and picketing and protesting for nearly 4 years. And I had never been to jail, and I get to Milwaukee and utilizing the strategies of direct action, I couldn't stay out of jail. Here we are protesting grapes, using Father Grappi's direct action, standing in front of the grapes. And what does Cold Food Store do? Well, they call the cops and throw us in jail, as you can see in the lower of that picture. Well, while we're in Milwaukee, the poverty agencies that have opened up, including the largest one, United Migrant Opportunity Services, they say, Jesus, come on over and help us. There's no Mexicanos in leadership roles in UMass. All the administrators are non-Latinos. Long story short, we take over UMass as our $1 million grant. I make a commitment to stay for 2 years. And rechange the focus of UMass as a child care agency into one that advocated on behalf of migrant workers. And while this is happening, a whole emergence of a number of community-based organizations. United Community Center separates itself from the Christian Center. And of course, now you see one of the most successful community-based organizations. El Centro Hispano, Ernesto Chacon organizes the Latin American Union for Civil Rights. Employment and training programs open up. The 16th Street Clinic is founded. La Causa Child Care. So in a area and about 10 or 12 blocks, there's just a whole bunch of activity having to do with social community health agencies that develop. And of course, here we go. We are joining Father Grappi in the Youth Council in protesting welfare rights, and we take over the Capitol. They remove us with the National Guard. In Milwaukee, the protest for welfare marches leads to the arrest of Ernesto Chacon, the LAUCR leader, and Jose Puente. Marches begin here through the 70s, 69 and 70s, and all these activities, all the organization that we're doing in the community-based organizations. Now we have almost 200 Latinos working in these agencies, and of course, all of these responsibilities require university background. At that time, the University of Wisconsin, 25,000 students, all the Latinos could sit around one table. So we started demanding access to the University of Wisconsin, and a multi-year effort. Now, I believe the establishment of the Spanish-speaking Outreach Institute, now called the Roberto Hernandez Center, informs us that there are over 2,000 Latinos enrolled at UW-Milwaukee. My 2 years were up, and I decided I wanted to teach at the post-secondary level. So I enrolled at the University of Wisconsin, and you have here a newspaper that we published, a Portavoz, and this is a 1983 issue, and it refers to 1975. We started protesting the retreat by the university system on their minority goals, and at that time, in the Letters and Science, Dean Cronin had established a faculty and student committee to recommend Chicano studies. When we recommended a department, he said he didn't have the money for it. So we started being right there in Madison, lobbying on behalf of the what was going on at the university system and at the University of Wisconsin. And meanwhile, as you can see in the newspaper, we're opposing the invasion of our barrios by immigration services. Reagan has invited Grenada and supporting the contras against the government in Nicaragua, and all these activities lead us to develop coalitions and continue a legislative initiative that we undertook with no Latino representatives. So in conclusion, this is an extraordinary activity that we undertook for over a 10-year period of time. We amend the University of Wisconsin budget to create Chicano studies. The university was pissed. They didn't want the Chicano studies program. They certainly didn't want the legislature to mandate academic programs. So they were sitting on their money, and there began a 10-year protest to move that money and to begin the offering of the courses. At that time, this is 1975. In 1974, in San Francisco Independent School District, Chinese students are complaining that they need supplementary material because of their lack of language proficiency in English, and they demand bilingual education. So Lau versus Nickel, 1974 is issued. The civil rights issues the recommendations for the bilingual program. So while we're at the state capitol, the Bilingual Act, the Bicultural Act passes in 1975. Later on in 1977, Governor Lucy, with his support, and now we have extensive support from legislators and community, an organized community, and we passed the migrant labor law that we had been advocating for over a decade. Then in 1984, the Chicano students at the university proposed, organized, got sponsors for, and passed the migrant tuition bill, which allows former migrant workers who worked in the fields from 3 to 5 years to have access to the university system without being considered non-resident students. That legislative initiative, it keeps on going today. Mecha students here are supporting Voces de la Frontera immigration rights activities. On the far left, you see trying to have access of driver's license for the undocumented. On the far right, you see the posters of the opposing the separation of families, and the other poster, in-state tuition for children of undocumented families who want to enroll in the university system. And that activity of Voces continues to this day. This is the primary legislative initiative and the support of UW-Madison. Students that we began to organize back in the mid-70s continues to this day.
Thank you so much. That was fascinating and fantastic stories, as well as wonderful images. I appreciate all of that. I also want to turn to Margarita next, who can give us her contemporary experience and share a little bit about her family story as well.
Am I muted? No. Sorry, can everyone hear me? Okay, cool. So hi everyone, my name is Margarita, UW-Milwaukee graduate, now at Urbana-Champaign. So today I'll be talking about Mexican migration to the Midwest. When we're together, we're home. And I'm really gonna focus this presentation on my family's migration story. And typically when you think of migration, you think of the nuclear family, the mom and the dad and the child. For my family, it was a little bit different. For us, it started off with my uncle. He's the one in this picture, and that's me right next to him. So he migrated to the United States by himself when he was 18 years old, when I was 3 years old. And he was the one that settled in Beloit, Wisconsin. Somehow, you know, found work in factories, because I think, I'm not really sure what brought him to Wisconsin, but he's been working in factories his whole time here, factory jobs, and he's the one that sent the money. He was there by himself for maybe like a year and a half, found an apartment, sent money for my mother, my grandmother, myself, and another uncle to be, you know, brought to the United States. So in these pictures, that's me with a cardigan, and that's my abuelita, my grandma, and that is my tío. He's the one that migrated by himself at 18 years old. In the bottom right picture, that's my grandma, who's kind of like the matriarch of the family. That's our, you know, that's our little family. That's me with the orange and white shorts. My uncle with the red hat, he also migrated with us, and then my mom, who migrated with us, of course. And then this couple in the back is my other uncle and my aunt who stayed in Mexico. So our whole family kind of just separated from that point. So for our migration story, after my uncle and my mom, or sorry, my uncle sent for the rest of us, we left the city of Mexico on May 29th of the year 2000, and we got to Beloit, Wisconsin on June 19, 2000. So we were walking in the desert for 3 weeks. I was 3 years old. We walked with a group of other people from our town or our city. And I don't remember the crossing. I only remember the things that my mom has told me, and there's stories that when I was younger, I wanted to know so bad, so I would have her tell me. So I kind of memorized her story at this point. But some of the big, you know, big takeaways for me from that story that I kind of can see vividly in my mind, even though, you know, my brain can't remember. We were stopped twice by Border Patrol. We were sent back. And then on our third go, we made it through, but we went through Arizona. We had a lot of clashes, or not interactions, or a lot of instances where life and death was, you know, that's just what was happening. That was the reality of it. We had run out of water jugs. My grandma was, you know, almost left behind. I was almost, you know, completely, you know, not left behind, but I almost didn't make it because we didn't have enough water. And on that time, my mom said that that's when the Border Patrol stopped us the second time. So for that, she's grateful that we were stopped. So yeah, our migration story is something that is really typical for people crossing the border, or crossing through the desert. We didn't cross through the river, we crossed through the desert. You know, hiding, walking at night. I believe we walked at night and not in the day. You know, sleeping in like caves, you know, having to fend off animals, having to fend off people trying to, you know, rob you or extort you. And you can imagine that's, you know, more scary when you're with a 3-year-old, and for my family, at least my mom and my grandma and my uncle, who kind of had to protect us. He had to take on that role of protecting us. So yeah. So eventually we make it to Beloit, Wisconsin, in June. And that's the stage of my life, reunification and separation. So when we made it to Beloit, my two uncles, my grandma, my mom, and I, we lived in this little 2-bedroom apartment, and they would take shifts working in factory jobs. So someone would work at night, someone would work throughout the day, and that's kind of how they took care of me. In Beloit, Wisconsin, I don't remember exactly, but they did take advantage of some resources where I remember, you know, getting food packages or clothes or backpacks or things that I needed for school. My family was actively, you know, seeking these things out, actively, you know, trying to learn English. And it's really just amazing to me because they're in this whole new foreign environment where they just got ahead. They got an apartment, they got jobs, they did what they had to do to keep us together. And this is a period of my life that I love because it's when the majority of my family, except for one uncle, we were together. But then, of course, when I turned 6 years old, my mom and I moved to Milwaukee because she got married, and I had to leave my uncle and my grandma behind. So that was kind of difficult for me because that's my nuclear family. They were the ones that raised me. So for me, it was hard. It was a separation that never sat right with me. And of course, I visited them every weekend. But still, they weren't there every day and every night that I woke up. And then when I turned 12 years old, my grandma, or a little before I turned 12 years old, my grandma self-deported because there was, stuff going on in Mexico with her family. She had some issues with the law here. So she just didn't see it as a viable option of staying anymore. My other uncle also decided to leave. So now all that was left was me, my mom, me, and my uncle. And those two are really the ones that are kind of like my parents. They got me ahead, and they're my only family here. So now, 10 years later after that, we're a transnational and mixed status family. My abuelita, she isn't allowed to come back to the United States. She has to wait a period of 10 years. That's how the law works. If you can't leave and then, you can't enter and re-enter, you have to wait, kind of like a punishment. My uncle who came here by himself, the 18-year-old, he's been here. He made a life for himself. He doesn't have papers, so there's no legal way for him to get citizenship anymore. So we're kind of dealing with, I'm kind of dealing with, or we're all kind of dealing with that fear of separation again, where we're feeling the effects of the border, and we don't live on the borderlands, but of course, when I'm with my uncle, or from what I know from my uncle, he lives in constant fear, constantly, wanting to be in the shadows because, you can't go out to eat. It's hard for you to, enjoy anything, go out to eat with your family, go to work, go to the stores. And my mom and I are naturalized citizens, so that's hard for us also, because there's not much we can do anymore according to a bunch of immigration lawyers. So we kind of just have to be that support system for my family, my uncle here, for my grandma over there, for my other family in Mexico. So something that I think is that can apply to transnational and mixed status families now. One way of survival that I think we all have to use are WhatsApp or like group chats. This is something that keeps me and my family kind of unified. We share memes, we video call, we do video group chats like this whenever one of us is feeling down or just lonely because I can't travel anymore to Beloit. We can't be together on the holidays anymore. There's always this like looming fear that one day we're really totally going to be separated again, and we're not going to be together anymore for holidays. It's not going to be a 3-hour drive anymore. So that's something that kind of keeps us connected to each other, kind of keeps us laughing, keeps us happy. We send each other memes. We're able to talk. We can send voice messages. It's not like before in the early 2000s when we had to go to a Mexican store and buy a card to call to Mexico, and now phones come with automatic, calling to other countries. And something that I learned from my experiences and from interviews that I did with other immigrant students at UW-Milwaukee whose families migrated to rural Wisconsin or like even cities in Wisconsin, that I thought was really fascinating is that moms, and the mom is kind of like the pillar of support and kind of just like the pillar of everything, because, and of course that's something that I realized a long time ago, but moms kind of, they provide that emotional support, the economic support, and they go out and find the resources in the cities, in the rural towns, and they make it happen. And that's something that, a sentiment that I found in common with a bunch of other younger people from my generation is, I don't think I could ever do that now in 2020. So that's all just kind of like a really big motivator, I guess, and like source of inspiration that, I had an uncle who came here by himself at 18, figured it all out, established himself. And then I have my mom and my grandma who come and carry me literally through the desert and keep pushing me further, utilizing all the tools in Wisconsin that were there, finding jobs, reaching, climbing the ladders at their works, but then not being able to go any further because they don't have papers or they're using fake papers. And then just everyone kind of having to have the responsibility of making sure we call, making sure we send memes every Sunday, making sure we just check in, and let each other know that the support is still there. Talking about being undocumented is not something that we talk about all the time, but it's something that we know in our family that, something bad can happen at any moment, so we all have to be prepared. So it's hard at times like these being separated, but thank God for technology that we can, video call and kind of keep our sense of home in this time and age. So yeah, so that's just a little bit about my family story, and I am done.
Thank you so much, Margarita. And thank you to all three presenters for sharing your work and your experiences. I'll start with some of the questions that came through the Q&A or the chat. Again, if you've just joined us and you have questions for any of our presenters, please do feel free to put it in the Q&A and I'll just help moderate and keep the discussion flowing. The first question was to you, Rachel, and it had to do with the Promotores de Salud program. And if you could talk a little bit about some of the qualitative and quantitative ways you're gathering information and measuring the impact of this program.
Sure, thanks so much for that question. So I'm a qualitative researcher, so it's mainly qualitative methods that I'm using. And by that, I mean that I started the project by doing focus groups with 23 health promoters a little over a year ago. I'm really glad I did it then. And because now all of our work is remote. And so it was nice. I actually did like a weekend trip where I drove to Madison, Platteville, Lake Geneva, and Milwaukee. Well, I live in Milwaukee, so I came back to Milwaukee and held 4 focus groups with different promotores that live in those different areas. I've now finally had the time to really spend time with the conversations that we had in those focus groups because of just how busy the last year had been with the pandemic and everything. And I am doing interviews right now with staff members, administrators who work with Planned Parenthood of Wisconsin to get a sense of their understanding of the work of the health promoters. And a lot of them have been very supportive of Marie and the health promoters kind of doing things the way they want to do them. And so part of why I'm interviewing them is because I collaboratively designed this with Maria to make sure that some of the things I was getting information on would be things that she was wanting to know more about. And so she looked over and helped inform a lot of the questions that I asked different people. I was originally going to also interview community members who had hosted these home health parties. For various reasons, that's kind of shifting because there's a lot of interesting things going on with their work this year. But I am wanting to do some additional work talking to and learning from both community members and health promoters in this spring, summer, and going into next year about measuring the effectiveness. That's a good question. A little bit of what I did is just kind of looking at learning more about basically their communication skills and the ways that they communicate about different things with different people, kind of what we might call an asset-based approach. So looking at the ways that they do things well, as opposed to the ways they're often portrayed in sort of health scholarship of having all these health disparities and having that be the forefront. I wanted the forefront to be like, I think that the health promoters do things very well, and I want to learn more about those. So that's kind of guiding what I've been doing so far. But I need that other aspect of it to get so far. As far as program evaluation, they've had different forms of program evaluation over the years, both in feedback, do the different programs with them, forms of evaluation. I'm not doing as much of like a programmatic evaluation of their curriculum right now. I'm doing more of kind of inquiry into the stories and experiences that they have and sort of seeing where that's leading me with the future of this project.
Thank you. We have a question from Andrew that's directed to Jesus Salas. And his question is that related to your historical overview of migration from the Texas borderlands to the Midwest. And he says it's fascinating in history that he had never learned, having attended K through 12 public schools from 87 to 2000. Certainly, I know I'm not a Wisconsin transplant. I hadn't gone to schools here, but this was also very new and fascinating for me. Can you talk a little bit about the history and whether it's widely known and taught in K through 12 schools today?
There were two aspects during the sesquicentennial. We submitted a grant to the Wisconsin Humanities Council because we wanted to identify, we wanted to relate the contribution of migrant farm workers to the history of the state of Wisconsin. And that's when we began our endeavor to doing it through these pictures. The union had always published a newspaper, and any one of you that have ever published a newspaper, you take a roll of film and maybe you use one or two pictures in your newspaper or your newsletter. So we began to identify tell our story through these pictures, and Wisconsin Humanities Council was instrumental in doing that. Later on, when I was teaching at Milwaukee Area Technical College, I was invited to participate in social studies, having the migrant contribution being part of the social studies curriculum in the state of Wisconsin. And I work with that through that period of time, again, to identify the contribution. What we had done, what the generation of farm workers had done, is we changed a household industry here in Wisconsin to a national powerhouse in agriculture. We became the leader of the production of peas, of corn, of cabbage, et cetera, of a number of products as a result of this of the farm workers. These 15,000 workers that we used to come in yearly. Now the workforce has completely changed. Most of the workforce is no longer family-based. Is primarily single male, many of them undocumented. And in the meatpacking plants, you find the same situation of both men and women. Again, many of them, Mexican, other Latino groups, and quite a number of them that are undocumented. And as we've seen during the pandemic, that President Trump gave the authority to these meatpacking plants to continue production and not follow the guidelines of the separation of the distance separation, washing of the hands, wearing of the mask. And we had great problems that arose in those communities, in the Latino community, so that you have in the number of individuals who have become ill, who have become contaminated, by the COVID-19. The Latino community is one of the largest groups because of the nature of the workforce in the migrant labor camps to this day, and in the meatpacking and other related industries. So we continue to have large problems. Now, these are in addition to the problems that we have Voces de la Frontera, as was Rachel noted earlier, getting involved in getting Latino representation and having their voice out there for some of the issues that relate in our community that were mentioned earlier.
I think a related question that came in from Lucy was if you could think a little bit or speak a little bit more about the power of contemporary labor unions.
Yes, the union, the farm workers union, we were an independent union. If you notice in the flag of our first manifestation, our banners were NFWA, or that is Cesar Chavez's union was the National Farm Workers Association. Later, they joined with the Filipinos in the grape strike, and the Filipinos were organized under the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee. So the NFWA and the AWOC became United Farm Workers Organizing Committee, AFL-CIO. And that grew in the 70s and early 80s to over 15,000 farm workers. As I mentioned earlier, we were a transnational union, so I used to spend my winters organizing down in Texas because there was no way how we were going to organize Libby's 700 workers in 4 6 weeks cucumber growing season. And so I got involved with the Texas Farm Valley Organizing Committee down there, led by former Chavez VP by the name of Tony Odendine. And there, of course, the big problem was the anti-union laws that were the right-to-work laws in the South that prevented not only farm workers, but the domestic workers and other industrial workers from joining unions. So the farm workers has had the same problems as other industrial workers in the South organizing because of the right to work laws. And most recently, really antagonistic reactions by the states of against trade unions in general and farm workers organizing. The California Farm Workers Union has, they're no longer 50 to 80,000 as we were back in the 70s. They've had a lot of difficulties. So in addition to the farm work organizing in Wisconsin, FLOC, or that is a Farm Labor Organizing Committee led by Valdemar Velasquez, were successful in organizing Campbell Foods in their tomato industry. Other organizing by farm workers in Florida, the tomato harvesters, a very unique way of organizing, have also have increased their working conditions through their association. So the activities continue, and through a lot of difficulties, primarily because of the restriction, the laws, the right to work procedures in the southern states where the agricultural industry still dominates, and anti-immigrant sentiment across the U.S. But yes, it's been very, very hard organizing. It was back then, and it's still to this day, a very challenging aspect, improving wages and working conditions.
Thank you. Our next comment and question is directed at Margarita Rojas. Your personal story about immigrating to the U.S. from Mexico in 2000 and the different challenges your family faced in crossing the border and navigating life as a transnational and mixed status family is powerful. And we're honored to hear your story and that you've shared it with us. What is a specific legal barrier or change in immigration policy that would eliminate the fear of separation that transnational and mixed status families face? I don't know if you want to talk about this either from your own personal family story or from that of others that you interviewed here while you were doing your research.
Hi, thank you for your question. I think one barrier specific to my family is that of, not being able to have driver's license. That, that limitation of mobility is something that causes a lot of anxiety, a lot of just fear to go out, to go out to eat, to go to work, to just do anything. There's a lot of fear because you don't have, the right to drive. You don't have the right to be mobile. I've had a lot of, not a lot, but there's been a couple of instances in my family with my uncle who doesn't have a license, but he has his ID from Mexico. He drives with that. And he got pulled over once for not having his lights on. And luckily, the police didn't do anything because he had his Mexican ID, but the police kept that ID. So, I mean, I think if, police don't just like keep your license when you give it to them. So that's something that caused even more like fear and just like distrust in the police. And I think, that's something that happens in a lot of, it happens a lot in immigrant communities, I think. Who can you tell, who can you run to for safety when the person that's supposed to be protecting you is taking advantage of you and, taking your only your right to drive and, just be mobile away. So I think that's just one specific thing that would ease that fear of separation for my family, and I think for a lot of others. So yeah, thank you for your question.
Rachel, may I add something to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the in-state tuition is another big barrier for many of our youngsters who qualify to go into the UW system, who have to pay out-of-state tuition. I think it's a big barrier for the immigrant community. We have some outstanding students who graduate from high school with all of the qualifications to go any of our university system school, but because of the in-state tuition. And by the way, we succeeded through the efforts of Voces de la Frontera, the C4 group, in getting in-state tuition. But the last Republican governor rescinded that right. So presently we don't have that right. And I think there's a lot of support for our DACA students who just have been an outstanding contribution to our country. And I think there's a lot of support, and we're gonna try again to get that in-state tuition and give the opportunity to all our qualified students to have in-state tuition so that they can pursue careers of their choices.
We had another question that asked us to think a little bit about collaboration. I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative and edit a little bit of Raul's question to Jesus and also expand it and ask all of you to think a little bit about this. Raul Galvan's question to Jesus asks you to say a little bit more about the collaboration between African American community and the Latino community in the late 1960s, and whether or not that spirit of collaboration is alive today. And I wanted to also give the Margarita and Rachel an opportunity to also think about collaborative stories across other communities that you work with or have had a chance to engage with. So I'll start with Jesus.
Yes, I identified in my discussion the relationship that Father Grappi and I and the NAACP Youth Council enjoyed. But I had a long-term relationship with Lloyd Barbie. Lloyd Barbie was instrumental in the desegregation lawsuit against the Milwaukee public schools. And one of the collaborations that we undertook with the lawsuit for the desegregation of the schools was the provision that it include a bilingual program. This is before, I'm talking before 1970s, when the Lau-Nichols Supreme Court decision of 1974 went into effect. We had succeeded in amending the Elementary and Secondary School Act, so there were some bilingual programs that were authorized federally in 1968, but they were underfunded. Our relationship with Lloyd Barbie and the desegregation was the school walkouts. We began to organize the students in all the near South Side schools, Ellen Fields, South Division, View School, etc., in demanding bilingual education, the celebration of the Fiestas Patrias. And this began in 1971, 1972, and this supported the activities that Lloyd Barbie was undertaking in desegregation lawsuit that he had with the Milwaukee public school system. We also developed relationship with Val Phillips. We got the support of Val Phillips and the Milwaukee City Council. At that time, Orville Pitts was a member of the County Board of Supervisors, and we got Lloyd Barbie, the assembly person, and all in support, exhorting the African American community to support the Latino community in the grape boycott of grapes on behalf of the California farm workers. When we undertook the legislative initiatives that I closed my discussion on, Lloyd Barbie was a member of the Assembly. Reverend Monroe Swan was a member of the Senate. They were instrumental in terms of sponsoring the initial legislation that I spoke to during this period of time, and helping us organize support for the legislative initiative. So these are very important references, because normally when you talk about the African American community civil rights movement, you talk about that separate from the Latino community. Very few commentators talk about this intersection that I'm referring to between both of the Latino and the African American civil rights movement.
Rachel, did you want to say anything about where you see intersections with other communities?
Yeah, so just briefly, I mean, as far as the reproductive justice movement overall, although I mentioned that it began and was initially coined by a group of Black women working in Chicago, the movement began with the coalitions across different groups, and a number of major leaders with Latina reproductive health and reproductive rights groups were at the table of creating Sister Song as a collective of women of color. So there's that. And I think more locally, what I can just briefly share are in the last couple months, I've been a part of the weekly meetings with the health promoters as they've been training and talking about conversations with people about registering to vote. And there've been interesting conversations that surface because a lot of their grant funding is explicitly connected to serving the Latinx community, broadly speaking, or Spanish speaking community. And yet in this experience of registering people to vote or finding people who they could call and encourage, they were experiencing moments when they could reach out to people who they were mentioning who were African American, who are white, who are not Latinx. And they were like, can we still do this? Can this still be a part of our work? And they were like, Maria, their director, had said, yes, of course, our kind of main goal continues to be serving the community. But right now we want to be encouraging as many people to be voting as we can. And there was even an experience where somebody because a lot of it was, can you connect me with somebody else who might need help figuring out where to vote, how I can help them get their ballot or update their ID. And they came across somebody who only spoke Hmong, and they turned to another health promoter who, because of a relationship in their family, knew someone who spoke Hmong and Spanish, and they were able to help with this conversation with this person that they were connected to. And so I thought that was a really nice example of thinking about collective resources and communicating with others and working across immigrant and migrant groups as well.
I just want to add a little bit more on contemporary stuff for younger generations. I think there's a large sense of unity and community across, different communities, immigrant groups, racial groups, ethnic groups. So I do see a lot of, interaction and kind of just a shared sense of the struggles that groups in this country have gone through. I don't have much, on the ground experience. The people that I did interview, they were all of Mexican background. Their immigrant stories, they were all of Mexican background. So I would love to talk to people from, different countries, different backgrounds, to see how our stories are similar, how they're different, and what are the factors that play into that. Yeah, I don't have much to say about that.
Thank you. We have a comment from Laura Matthew. What a wonderful set of presentations. The long-term maintenance of caring bonds within the family and throughout the community across generations and in the face of great difficulty and distance contains great power and is an example to us all. Thank you. I echo that. And let's see, I think I have a follow-up question from Raul, and it may be for Jesus, your comments about the work that that you were drawing from and all of the interconnections in the 60s with African American communities and other communities. The question was, do you continue to see those intersections today? In other words, is the current organizing efforts that are taking place in Wisconsin among the Latino community continuing to engage cross-sectionally with other communities?
Yes, absolutely. It's always been our effort to have those kind of relationships between the two communities. I think in the legislative initiatives that I mentioned, those continue. I was a member of the Voces C4 group, and for those of you that don't know, the C4 status gave Voces de la Frontera the opportunity to engage in political activities, or that is to raise funds, to endorse candidates, to get out the vote activities, some that Rachel mentioned, and not only in the state legislative arena, but in the local arena. We have excellent relationships with the African American community and have worked very closely with our recently elected Sheriff Lucas. We worked tirelessly to get an individual like him to represent us and to have his views in concert with the status of undocumented and what the role of the police in the county, and of course later on with Morales in the city police as it regards to the immigration. What is the role of the county sheriff and of the since they administer the jail, and of the chief of police vis-a-vis the deportation or the detention of immigrants. And I think our relationship with the African-American community and African-American leaders, and in this case, the sheriff of the county, was instrumental. I think Jose Perez, our first Latino in the city council, we've been very supportive of the relationship that he has with, we are a minority community. So the relationship that we enjoy with the African-American representatives in the city council is of great importance for the development of the city budget. And now that we have with Samauripa, former assembly person now in the city council, supportive individuals like Marina Dimitrijevic, we have excellent relationships with the African American community. So my references to the relationship between the two minority groups cuts across, not only in the initiatives that I mentioned at the state legislature, but in the local arena, or that is with the recently elected Marcella in the County Board of Supervisors or in the City Council. Yes, it's an excellent question, and it's really a challenge for us to maintain those relationships.
Thank you. We are nearing the end of our program time. I want to thank all of the panelists for sharing their work, their experiences, their personal stories. All of the chats and the Q&As have been so appreciative of your sharing your stories. I think it's been really poignant for us as we close the series to really think about what's at stake, that these aren't just abstract policy discussions that are taking place in Washington, and that the various push and pull factors that drive people to migrate really have just real impacts. They affect people, they affect families, they are parts of our community story, they're part of our stories. And so, you know, the stakes have never been higher for, I think, having an empathetic conversations about how we support our communities, how we support each other, how we promote the health outcomes that we want to see, and also learn from the experiences of migrants. And, you know, the story about the Promotores here having brought a fantastic model that has been effective and communicating health information in new ways to communities here suggests that we're learning, right? We have the opportunity to learn and get better. So with that, I know you've piqued everyone's curiosities. I hope the series has piqued everybody's curiosities, and I hope we'll have an opportunity to meet again and share more information in the future. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Gracias.